Welcome back to Yaffee Live, Talk Radio 102.3, live and local now, live and local all day long. Appreciate you joining the show. If you want to weigh in on the text monster, you can. 423-267-1023. That is the text monster. One person made a really good point, said, I think the ICE agents have their faces covered at this point because of all the violence and repercussions they have faced. So the protesters have themselves to thank for the fact that the ICE agents are using masks at this point. I mean, we all know that's why. Now, all they have to do is say it's for COVID, and they'll get away with it. Then the left won't have anything to say. They'll just say it's because of COVID.
Oh, you're killing me.
You have no way to argue that. All right. Joining us on the show right now is Olivia Lupia. She is a reporter for the Tennessee Conservative, and, of course, you can read that every day, TennesseeConservativeNews.com. Olivia, how are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing good. Doing good. So the big story that everyone in Tennessee politics is talking about, and you have it on the site as well, is the Supreme Court case where Tennessee's ban on so-called gender-affirming care, and I always say so-called, I always put it in quotes because it's really the opposite of what it is, but medical treatment for minors upheld by the Supreme Court thanks to the conservative majority on the court. What is the latest on this?
This was huge. Yes, a landmark decision, which is great to see Tennessee leading the way on such an important issue. This is really exciting. I think it's one of those kind of rare wins that it doesn't matter who you are, even if you're, not necessarily a hardcore conservative, you have any kind of common sense. You see that this is a big deal in the fact that basically it's common sense that says if your kid is under 18, they don't have the capability to make huge life-altering bodily mutations, basically, because there's potentially so many negative effects. So it was something that wouldn't seem to, be an issue, but you've got leftists who literally want the right to mutilate children under this terrible label of gender dysphoria. And the case was great because the majority made very clear that it's not discriminating against, people who consider themselves transgender from receiving medical care. They're just saying the state has the right to decide that children cannot make these decisions for themselves. So that's really huge and very exciting to see really a common sense win, but most importantly to protect our children, which we know are the most vulnerable and definitely a target demographic for these raging lunatics on the far left.
Yeah, you make a really good point there, actually, that I ain't talked about too much. It's not, if you believe you're a transgender individual, you can get medical care for things. And it's also not against equal protection clause in the Constitution because this is not an immutable characteristic and nothing to do with the equal protection clause. So the majority in the court said, look, at that point then, the Constitution doesn't cover this, so it's up to the states and the representatives and the people by voting. And that's basically what's happened here.
Exactly. It's, again, the court, I think, was very correct in basically saying if it's not in the enumerated powers of the federal government, it's not our business in a sense, which is true. Again, you kind of have to separate the legal from the moral issue. And as conservatives, a lot of times for us, that's one and the same, which is important. But here, they coincided so beautifully. There just wasn't really a choice but to say the states absolutely have this right. And, the longtime argument that I really thought was interesting that when I had conversations with people, they kind of couldn't answer this. And to say, well, why does it have to be for children? If let's suspend reality here for a second and say, if this child believes they're in the wrong body at 7, 8, 9, 10 years old, if they truly are, won't they still feel the same way at 18? So can't they make their own decision by the time they hit 18? Why do we have to jump on it now? You don't even make a decision about buying a new car or a new house without seeing it first, walking around, taking some time to, look it over, having a home inspection, all of those sorts of things. So if this child is truly in the wrong body, like I said, we're suspending reality for a second, then won't they still be in the wrong body at 18 and they can take care of it then when they're quote unquote an adult? So it was just I think, a really great, rare win where the court was able to separate as they should. They interpreted the constitutionality of what was before them, and it just also made sense that morally, I believe John Roberts said, like, that Tennessee has the right to protect minors from questionable medical practices.
Yeah, it's a good point. There
huge.
was an intersection between the fact that, yes, constitutionally speaking, Tennessee has a right to do this, but also morally speaking, our point of view, it aligns with that. It's a pretty good point. Speaking with Olivia Lupia, she's a reporter for the Tennessee Conservative. You can read her stuff at TennesseeConservativeNews.com. Another story you have here, we were talking a little bit about those No Kings protests that happened over the weekend.
Yes.
I mean, how did that? They were all over the state, all over the country, but what was the attendance like in Tennessee for these?
So this was really interesting. I can't say for sure because I don't obviously have the hard data in front of me. I don't know that anybody really does. But overall, I would say that these No Kings protests was a whole lot of talk and then a whole lot of flop. There just was some mixed bag. Now, we did have a couple of cities that brought in some, I would say, some decently significant numbers. Knoxville had, I believe, numbers are putting it somewhere between 7,000 to 7,500, somewhere in there. Memphis had supposedly close to 4,000, which is fine. No one, is on our side is certainly going to tell you don't have the right to protest. That's a constantly, constitutionally protected right. But I think there was a lot of bluster for not a whole lot of turnout. And from what I have seen, it's kind of twofold. Is number one, it was just hyped up for a lot of nonsense. Is one year in Tennessee, which I don't think that was really going to go super well. Particularly, they were expecting huge numbers for Nashville, and they had just over 1,000 people turn out. And it was really interesting because if you looked at some of the mainstream media headlines on the day, it was hundreds or 1,000 gather, and then the next day, conveniently, the headlines read thousands gathered or hundreds gathered, and then when you actually look at what they've reported, it's not that at all. So clearly, no bias or gaslighting from the mainstream media as per usual. But a very interesting mixed bag. And as we saw, I think, a trend across the country, if you really paid attention at the demographics who were turning out, I can't really be surprised. I'm sure the median average age of the protesters it had to be 55 and above. I think basically you had your seniors who came out, kind of your boomer demographic-ish, a little bit variation on the other side, and some of your young progressives. And other than that, nobody held any interest. And actually in Knoxville, they actually had one protester who she says, I'm very disappointed with the turnout of young people, or the lack thereof. Is we're literally in a college, there's a college campus right here, and the young people didn't show up. So I think that pretty much tells you everything you need to know about what they wanted versus what they got.
Yeah, that's one thing I've noticed, because it's, we had the hands-off protests. You got fight the oligarchy. But when I went to, it was supposed to be a town hall, even here in town, it was all old people. I mean, there were very few young people. It would just seem to be older people who thought their Social Security was going to be taken away or something. And it was like, it was kind of amazing to see, because usually when you have big rallies like this, it's young people. But young people don't seem interested. I think the other issue they had, though, is they were protesting against that parade of the history of the Army. And you watch the parade, it was just, it's just a decent parade about the history of the Army. Like, it was not what they were portraying it, at least on the left, to be.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. That was so hilarious to me, because I'm not sure how you think you're fighting the oligarchy when we're having a parade celebrating history. Like, that's a pretty odd hill to try and die on. So,
yeah, I mean, they were trying to make it seem like he was acting like a dictator in North Korea or something. But when you actually watch the parade, it really didn't come off that way.
Oh, not at all. Well, and people forget, too, we've had military parades numerous times throughout our history. So this isn't an isolated incident. This wasn't a show of force, which I think is what they were trying to compare it to a lot of these parades you see in, like, North Korea or China or Russia, et cetera. Those are shows of force. this was a celebration, and it very much came off that way. There was no question when you watched it. And then, of course, they were trying to spin the whole thing that, he planned it for his birthday and blah, 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 when, again, it's a very, very easy to confirm that preparations for an event started under the Biden administration. So, again, they lost a lot of steam when people were able to confirm simple facts that they were trying to completely spin out of proportion, as per usual.
I'm speaking with Olivia Lupia. She's a reporter for the Tennessee Conservative. Another story we got to talk about, kind of on a similar note here, but, it's the tail end of Pride Month, and apparently funding for some of these Pride events, especially in places like Nashville, big cities, apparently that's kind of dried up a little bit because the support for DEI from businesses and stuff's kind of changed a little bit.
Yeah, there's definitely some shifting going on, I think, not just culturally. Well, we're seeing it culturally, which is then leading to financial. So anyone who says, that culture isn't worth fighting to change is wrong, because we're seeing the effects of that. If you change the culture, you truly can change every impact or have impact across every area, business, finance, etc. And so organizers for Nashville Pride, which is like the big one, and usually have all these corporate sponsors and it's a big deal and all that. Supposedly they're reporting that they've lost several kind of long-time big corporate sponsors ahead of the 2025 event. I think it's scheduled, a couple weeks from now, sometime soonish. And they are saying they've got a significant budget gap that they need to fill. So they're asking people to really step up. They're begging for money. They need volunteers. They need sponsors. They need people to, I believe they said, show up where others have stepped back. And I just think that's hilarious because it just goes to show you, again, so goes the culture, so goes America. And we have direct impacts on that. Now, there's a couple of factors, I think, driving that. Is first, obviously, we have President Trump's executive order, that starts dismantling DEI just across everything. So you're looking at this at a federal level, that it's no longer popular to do this DEI nonsense. And then even in Tennessee, we had two separate DEI measures that were passed, one for hiring to make sure that there were no hiring practices based on DEI, and then also another one that basically says there can be no official DEI departments in any kind of government entity. So including education institutions, higher education institutions. So between that, I think corporations are not only seeing that Trump's not playing around with revoking federal funding. We've seen some of that with Harvard and some of the other Ivy Leagues and some schools in California, that he's not joking when he said enough, he meant enough. And the DEI laws here that Tennessee passed kind of do that. They play into some funding and grant money and things like that. So there is direct repercussions for engaging in this behavior. Also, the political pushback, I think, kind of building on the Bud Light momentum, plus the advocacy work of Tennesseans like Robbie Starbuck. He's done an amazing job of really doing a deep dive and exposing. You're seeing a lot of these companies for the first time be, I think, more aware of their consumer base isn't happy. And now, because we feel empowered, their consumer base is willing to push back in the way we can, which is with our dollar. So that directly hurts them. So we're seeing these organizations like Pride, even if they're getting the sponsors, a lot of the sponsors are saying, well, we don't want to be recognized by name, which I think is pointless, but I'm not in charge. So there you go.
Olivia Lupia, she's with the Tennessee Conservative. Read TennesseeConservativeNews.com. All the stories we've been talking about in this segment are right there on the website, TennesseeConservativeNews.com. Of course, you can subscribe absolutely for free. It shows up in your email inbox every day. Olivia, I appreciate it very much. I'll talk to you again next time.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.